Okay, good morning. If you're just signing up this month, this painting has already been started and we will send you the video to the first start of it. If you're continuing on, then let's get started. So we have our underpainting. Basically, this is an underpainting. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start with the sky, and we're going to get that into an atmosphere that we can then add this to it so it becomes in the same world. I remember when I was first starting to paint, there goes my brush. I remember when I was first starting to paint that sometimes I would work one area and then another area, and they didn't feel like they were in the same world. It can be an issue. So the best way to do that is I like to, when it's a landscape, I like to start from the back and work front. But I'm always, always very aware of it being in the same world. So the sky on this, the last video, the aperture in the camera was really light, and so you couldn't see it. It seemed like the painting was a lot lighter than the original, but it really wasn't. And as you can see from it now, I haven't touched it yet, this is from last time, that it's actually fairly close. So I noticed that down here it's a little darker than what I have in the photograph. It's a little darker here, so we're going to add some of those darks first. And what I did was I neutralized a lavender. So you make a lavender with, in this case I would like you to use the cadmium red, ultramarine blue, and white to make the lavender, because the cadmium red will already neutralize it a little more than, say, the alizarin. And then if you needed to add any more to neutralize it, just add a little tiniest bit of yellow. You can experiment yellow ochre or Naples yellow or cadmium yellow. Just remember the cadmium's going to be a lot brighter. A Naples yellow probably would be best. So I'm just with a fairly dry brush, I'm just going to rub in some darks in here, just to get that atmosphere that is really dark. And the clouds there kind of get lost in that darkness, so I'm just going to scumble some darks in there. Scumble is when you take a dry color and put it over another color, and you see both colors coming through. It's generally done with a light over dark, but in this case I'm doing the dark over light. And it kind of comes up here too. Now, if you hear any banging, I apologize. We're still in the throes of getting some work done on the house. We had put it off for a long time due to my medical bills, and now it's to the point where it's desperately needed to be done, or the structure of the house is going to be compromised. So we had no choice. So if you hear some banging, I'm trying to work around it, which is why these videos have been somewhat sporadic, because it's hard. Some of the banging was actually right outside this room, and there was no way I could do a video with it going on. Never mind just paint with it going on. I have been painting through it. It's been, because I have commissions, and it's been a nightmare, I have to say. But when it's done, we'll be happy. Okay, now we also have dark that's under the clouds that's darker than what we have. So this actually makes a nice atmosphere between here and here, this relationship. So let's bring it up a level. There's a light, and then the clouds get dark. So I'm going to take that same color, and I'm just going to put some of it under here. By using the same color in an atmosphere, in an area like this, you create that continuous atmosphere. Already, if you look at this compared to this, this has distance, and it has a foreground and far in a distance, and this kind of feels like it's on the same plane. So it comes down here. There's a couple of layers to this cloud. So remember, clouds, like everything else, are three-dimensional. So if it's three-dimensional, that means it has a height, a width, and a depth. And we're working on a two-dimensional surface to give the illusion of three dimensions. So how do you do that? Well, you can do that with a few tricks, like drawing will give you three dimensions, that checkerboard thing that I told you about. Also, angles in drawing will give you three dimensions. Value can do it, darks and lights, following the 6 lights will give you three dimensions. And color in the form of temperature and in complementary colors can give you that three dimensions. So in this, what we're using, sorry, there's trucks outside. What we're using is value. And we're also using a little bit of the color theory because this has a purplish tone, there's a yellowish tone to the clouds, which we're going to maintain in a more organized way. There's a dark under here. I want to get all those darks in the clouds so I can set that first before I start going into this area. Now it's not darker over here, so we're going to throw some lights in there, but you know, you can't tell how dark something should be or how light something should be until you make a declaration of how dark something is, which is one reason why I like to start with darks first. And once again, I'm using a Master Stroke Blick number 2. This is a filbert. A filbert is a rounder kind of brush, but it's not a round brush. You can tell right here at the base of the metal. If it's really flat, then it's a flat brush and it's straight across. If it's round, then it's really a cylinder and it comes to a point. And if it's a some people call it a cat's paw, some people call it a filbert. Mostly the industry calls it a filbert. Then it's kind of ovaled. And I like that. A lot of people like flat brushes. I personally like filberts. It's a personal taste kind of thing. And I like it because I like the way that it creates the edges. A flat brush can sometimes give you a flat edge, which some artists really like. And if that's you, that's okay. But I mostly use filberts and rounds. And you can get a thin line with any one of those brushes. You know, certainly you can with a round. A flat brush, you can get a thin line too by just kind of holding it like this and like that. But you can do that also with a fairly new filbert as well. Okay, we have this really dark that's up in here. All right, now let's address this. So that is kind of there's this weird kind of pale yellow in there too. It's not really yellow, it's kind of a teal, which has a tendency towards yellow. I just want to check this color. Now, all the time, I'll look at a color and I'll see it differently. I think everybody sees color slightly differently, and I go with it. I don't become a slave to the painting at all. I don't become a slave to the photograph at all, because I find that those differences in all our paintings is what makes us who we are. This one's, I'm putting a little more yellow in here. I'll put a little more over here. So that teal was just a little too much, so I'm going to add some neutralized yellow. So I think with this one what I did was yellow ochre and some Naples yellow and a little tiny bit of blue to kind of green it up just slightly. Excuse me. It's early in the morning. I'm not used to talking this early in the morning. Okay, I'm just going to rub that in just a little bit. So that creates this kind of feeling, you know, sometimes you see the sun coming through very slightly, and it gives this interesting kind of greenish color after a storm. That's what this is. Don't go too crazy with it, but it is there. Okay, and then it starts to get really fairly blue there. So I'm going to take a light blue, and for this light blue I actually used ultramarine, not cerulean, because cerulean is a little too yellow. And I'm just going to rub some of that in there. I'm being very careful of maintaining the grisaille and the underpainting in parts of this, because I think that it makes it more interesting. You know, if you just do blocks of color, which is a way of painting, which I do teach, similar to, say, the work you'd see from Wayne Thiebaud or early Diebenkorn, you know, where they take blocks of color and they declare it. That's a wonderful style, a wonderful style. And sometimes the plein air Gloucester painters will do that as well. This particular painting, I like to see the different layers. I like to see the history of the paint, and I often use that term with my older kids. History of paint is basically what you've put before. Now, there's this wonderful streak right here that I'm going to use the same color, and it's a very thin cloud. Now, we may put some reflected lights in some of these darks under the clouds, but we're not going to do that yet. First, we want to keep with that atmosphere and see what we end up with. And even though you probably shouldn't do this, I do this all the time, and most people that are professional artists that do clouds, I know do this. But I'm just going to take my finger and just soften those edges, because I want them to have a distinctive line, but at the same time, I don't want you to be able to say, oh yeah, the line goes like this. Well, the edge of it goes like this. I'm going to add a little more to the top too, because it kind of goes across. So you could start with a line like that, and then just rub it in a little. Okay, and then it gets kind of bluer. So I'm going to test this color. This color was made with, I made it with cobalt blue and some pale light blue. I think it's a pale king's blue and some white. But what you can use is ultramarine, cerulean blue, and some white. And if you need to tone it down, add the tiniest bit of like a peachy color to it. Actually, I think I did add peach to it after all as well. I have to say that when I'm mixing colors, I always have secondary colors on hand. So if you're just using the basic primary palette, make sure on your palette that you mix some secondary colors as well. So in other words, if you have just blues and greens, blues and yellows and reds, make sure you have ahead of time mixed orange, purples, and greens, so that when you need to neutralize a color, it's right there and you're not stopping your concentration to do it. Check my time here. Okay, I have to time this because the camera goes into sleep mode if somebody isn't touching it. Okay, so I'm going to take that color and I'm going to put that up in there to kind of brighten that a little bit up through here. Well, not brighten it, but to darken it, to make it more dramatic. Okay, now for the clouds, I like to put peach in the clouds a lot. And not really peach, but a neutralized peach, so it feels kind of warm. That's too dark. And I like to put that as the next layer above the darks. So it's not just going from dark to light, because if you look at a cloud, you can see it in this picture too. It's not really, I mean, in some areas perhaps it is, but there's a lot of color in clouds, and it's usually the atmosphere that's giving you that color. Okay, and then for the dramatic effect. You really have to understand where the light is coming from. So I'm just going to take some white. I know that the light's coming from this end going this way. So I'm just going to hit those top parts. And when I mean top parts, I don't mean just the very top. This is a top part too of this layer. And you want the paint to be fairly thick, because you don't want it to A, blend in with everything else, because you want it to keep it as clean as possible. And B, you want that feeling of cloud. And you want to have that dramatic effect of where the light meets the dark from the sky, you know. And I could go through this and like really get it to look exactly like that, but I don't think that's necessarily something that will help you. You can certainly do that, and I know some of you have done that, which is wonderful. Makes me feel really good when I see that you're really working it past what I have. But, you know, for the sake of doing the video, it's important for me to make sure that you know the steps, and then you can take it to that level that you want to. In other words, I'm just knocking it in and giving you the foundations. Okay, so why don't we say for now, that's the sky. And we're going to move on to the water. Okay, now for the water. We're going to work, and we think of this as water, but what we're going to do is we're going to split the water up. So we're going to work this back part first. Make sure that that's pushed really back far. Then we're going to work this part here, and then here, and then here. So for the back part, this area here is really, really dark, almost to the point of a beautiful dark royal blue. So you're going to use a lot of ultramarine for this. So it's going to be ultramarine. You could add the tiniest bit of sepia to it, or some burnt umber. On mine, what I used was, if you wanted to go out and get different colors, I used cobalt turquoise, ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt blue, and some sepia. I'm going to try to do this from a distance here and make a straight line. Look at how beautiful that pushed that sky back. So in general, the theory is the cooler something is, the further away that it is. So This is going to be much bluer than any of this down here, which is already, just because I have the underpainting, pushing it back. The line gets very thin when it goes, you know, the closer it gets over here. So let's see what I can do here. Oh, shoot. And that's what's wonderful about oil paint. You can always fix it. So to get that, I was turning my brush slightly to go so that I didn't have to add more paint. Because you add more paint, it's going to get darker or it's going to get thicker. So you know that you want this thinner over here than over here. And we can bring some of the other color up to do that. But if you twirl your brush as you go, it'll help you get that straight line. But at the same time, you won't have big globs of paint. Okay, so then the next layer is kind of that color, but a little greener, right? So in my case, I used a little more turquoise. But it's still fairly blue. Just another thin line there. You don't want to fill that in. And it's a little lighter over here, so I'm going to just add the tiniest bit of white. Now I'm going to take all the paint off my brush, and I'm going to soften that. If you hold your breath, it makes it easier to make a straight line. I'm also going to fix this, so I'm going to clean off the brush. Take a little bit of that color we used up there. And just bring it back down. Now, another way you can do this is take all the paint off your brush, make sure it's really dry, put your brush between the blue and the sky, and just bring it down. Okay, so the next, not the waves, but the next part of the ocean color is kind of light, but and it seems to get greener as it comes closer. So let's try this color. So this is the same color with a little more white, maybe a speck more yellow. And it goes under this wave. Probably a little too light. Bring it, darken it up just a little bit. Now all this becomes waves, right? And then there's one here. So let's do this one here and then we'll go back to the waves. So this one is fairly light. And there's a lot of stuff going on in there, so I'm just going to scumble a little of that color in there, just so I can separate that from the wave. All right, now let's go back to those waves up there. Now the waves aren't just one color. A lot of times a big mistake people will make is they'll say, okay, wave, take white and just, well, yeah, no. You got to start with your darks first. So the darks on the waves are kind of, some parts of it are peachy color, some parts of it are really definitely a gray. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a combination of the peach we used here and the dark we used there. And you should have that on your palette because you've just used it. I'm going to anchor my finger down here. And I'm just going to, I'm not going to try to follow the photograph exactly because I'd rather have the feeling that I have as an artist than trying to be somebody who's just representative of what it is. But I do know that it has these darks throughout. Then you can take your white and you can do this. In the same exact theory, you know, you're not trying to do something completely exact. And the whites down here are actually whiter than the clouds, so I may go back into those clouds at some point and maybe put some yellowish tones to the whites, but for now I just want to keep it like this. It's funny, with leaves and waves, my tremors actually come in handy. Tremors, unfortunately, is something that happens when you have lupus. I make that one down a little bit more just because it feels like, you know, it's further down the wave. You know, it's flipping over. Okay, then we got this guy. So now we have to add some darks into there too. So I'm going to take that same dark that we put up in here and I'm going to put it down there. Oh, there's a whole section here that's just water. So let's throw a dark in here. And a dark here. And we're going to add some green on top of that too because that's where it starts to change. But first we're going to start with just a dark. Value is more important than color. If it weren't, then all of the Impressionist paintings would not be able to be photographed in black and white, but they are. So that means that despite them, you know, being touted as all about color, it's really about value first, and the color supports it. Okay, let's try the white parts now. And I'm going to keep some of that underpainting to show, to give me almost a third value. You know, and as you're doing this too, I want you to think about the direction that the water's going, you know. If it's like bubbling up, then in your head think bubbling up. It's kind of bubbling up right there, you know. If it's swirling over, you know, and breaking, then think of it in those terms, you know. So don't just mindlessly daub white in there. Really feel the form and the direction of the wave. I'm going to put some color in here because I had missed that. And there's also some lighter lines that are kind of straight that go in there too. Okay, now in here, let's put in some lighter value. That color that I set up here at first, that light teal, I'm going to take some of that and I'm just going to give this sense that it's doing that. So you want some some people use a palette knife for this. I don't often use a palette knife unless I'm doing a really huge painting with a really large wave. This is a tiny little painting. Palette knives are great. You just got to remember you're going to use up a lot of paint when you use them. There's some grays in there too, so I'm going to take some lavender gray. And just give a few notes of a surface that's kind of flat there. Okay, now let's tackle this wave. So let's start with this guy here. Down the bottom of him, it's pretty dark down here. And I have it as a dark blue, but it's really a dark blue-green. So let's start with this. And it's a motion that's going this way. This is going to be really important. Your stroke direction on the form is going to be really important for this wave. And then this here is going to work into some of the sand color. But for now, let's just put that on there. Then the next layer is kind of bluish. That's probably too blue. So let's combine those two. So I had a light blue, and I'm going to combine this color with the light blue. Let's see what we get. Maybe a little more teal. You don't want a real sharp line between those two values. You kind of want them to coordinate together. And then it gets even lighter. So that's where the real light blue comes in. And then it gets really light. And there's streaks of that light coming down. Okay, so I've noticed that this part here is really hard to decipher in the photograph. But the one thing that I do notice is that there is this definite line that goes from here straight across and across this thing here. So we're going to put that in, and we're going to use a very pale yellow. So you could use a Naples yellow with a little bit of white, perhaps, and maybe a little bit of some teal into it, but not much. I want it to kind of feel yellow. So I'm going to turn the brush as I go, just to define this line. Not sure what's going on out there. And then I'm going to break it up. So the line will still be there, but it won't be so definitive. And over here, it actually curves under. And some of that teal comes back up over it. Actually, it's a little darker than that. It's kind of neutralized. So I'm going to take some of the teal, which is basically a green, and put it in some of the peach, which has some red in it, to kind of brown it down, because what's happening is there's sand coming up into that. And then where it goes down in here, it's that color a lot. It tucks in. And what will happen is when you put the light in through here, it'll be more of a dramatic effect and give you more of that wave feel, because it'll be a light against a dark. I'll try to talk a little louder because my neighbors are having something done over there, and it sounds like they have one of those generators on. Okay, and this transition here feels like it needs something yellow in there as well to get that light, the feeling of light. So it's kind of a little brighter too, and it's going to mix in with the color you already have. So it should, if we just add this, it should be the right color, but let's see. It's actually a little yellower, but I'm going to keep it because remember, in real life the color is going to be different than your photograph, and not to mention the fact that everybody's laptop screen is a different color. So you know, we're dealing with a lot of issues here as far as technique and what we have to use to get the point across. And I'm going to throw in a little more dramatic light blue in there. This is going to help with the form, the direction of the form, you know, because the wave doesn't just go up, it kind of goes up and it scoops, you know. Don't want to go too crazy, but it's there. Okay, now let's throw some white across the top edge there. And we might tone down these clouds a little because we don't want this competing with that. how do you get the splatters? Well, you could do this, but it's hard to control that. Yeah, I've done that before. It's hard on a small canvas though. So what we're going to do is we're just going to dot just a little bit of white up there. You want to be careful you don't lose the direction of your wave though in the process. Okay, and over here it becomes fairly dark, right? And warm. Notice how warm it is. Oh, shaky hands. Throw some white in there. Give it a little bit of light down there, but not real white. That's a reflected light. Okay, now that I can judge this to this, I want to tone this down because it feels too much like waves up there. So we're going to take a little bit of white and a little bit of peach. Actually, a lot of white, a little bit of peach. And there's white already up there, so probably you need a little more peach than you think. Let's just warm that up just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is soften the darks up there as well. So I'm going to add over them just the littlest bit of light blue. It'll still feel like a dark because we got the darks underneath there and it's wet. But I'm just going to add a little bit of light blue to some of them. You know, that sky blue color that we used here. Like I said, I could go back and make these clouds exactly like they are up there, but for this purpose, it's really more important that you understand that I'm trying to make this not the same as this. So that's the lesson I want you to take from that, not necessarily how exact I can get this. Okay, now let's go on to, let me see if I've run out of time, not yet. Now let's go on to some of this here. So we have this sand that's come up through the water in this area. So I'm taking yellow ochre that I've neutralized down with a little bit of lavender, with the dominant being yellow ochre, and I'm just going to rub that in here. And then I'm going to take that teal color, the darker one, and I'm going to rub it back in here. Go back again with the yellow ochre. Swing it around just a little bit here. So that we don't have this definitive line of one color to the next. Now there's a lot of foam there. So how do you do foam? Well, the best way to do it is to do the dark first underneath. So to do these parts underneath, we're going to have to just disregard the stuff on top first. Okay, and you're not going to get that exact thing there. Don't even try, because then you'll lose the gesture. So the thing you need to remember is it's a flat surface this way, so your strokes need to feel that way. So if I just take a darker sand color, which was that color that I mixed in with that, and thin it out just a little bit. Hold your brush like this if you can, and just kind of bring it along like this on the form. Imagine yourself standing there on the flat surface of that sand, and imagine the waves going around you, you know, the little rivulets. And towards the end here where it's really white, you're going to have just smaller ones. I think someday I need to build a soundproof room in here. And there's an edge of one that's kind of here, always going in that angled stroke on the form. So when I say a flat surface, I'm not talking about straight across, I'm talking about an angle. And then you can take that same color, darken it up with the tiniest bit of alizarin crimson, and put it right here. Oops, too fat. Turning your brush. Now you wouldn't have it on the very end here, but you would have it underneath here. Now we're going to do the same thing, only with the whitish color. So that whitish color, is it a pure white? Well, towards here it is, but up here it really isn't. So we're going to take, actually before we do that, let's take some lighter sand color. So that same color you just put in, just add a little bit of white to it. And we're just going to fill in some of those grisaille areas. It's probably where more of the foam is mixed in with the sand. When I'm doing these, you know, as a commission, that area of sand, I'd probably have about 6 different colors in it, just because that's the way I see things, but I'm trying to simplify this for you, and you can experiment with that, excuse me, you can experiment with that on your own if you want, of finding other color that goes in it, as long as you're true to the values. So I'm using two values for the sand up here, two separate colors that are very similar. You could experiment with complementary colors. In other words, you could experiment with a lavender in there as well, because lavender is a purple, purple is the complement of yellow. But I'm not going to do that with this one. Okay, so now for the white, it's going to be, let's see, it's a little cooler over here, a little warmer over here. So I think what I'll do is I'll do white with a little tiny pink, just a speck of pink in it. Pink is a cooler color. You can make that pink with just a, cad red and white. And this is going to be a very light touch. Fairly thick paint, very light touch. So I'm not pressing down at all because I want it to break up a little bit. I want it to have that feeling, excuse me, of not a solid line. In some areas I'm going to thin it out a little bit because I do kind of want it to feel like a solid line, but in areas where it meets up here, I want it to kind of be broken up. And you notice that there are times that I'm not talking as I'm doing this because I have to really concentrate, and because when I talk my arm moves. So I'm always kind of dealing with that. The solid one is going to be down along here. As it gets closer to you. Okay, so now we're going to whiten it up just a little bit. Still keep with the pink. It's kind of mixed in a little bit on my brush with some of the sand color, but that's okay. And thin it out a little bit. To make it a little more solid. Now, do you see the difference there of why I did that? And it's probably you can't see on the video, but you probably see on your own work that by creating an area that is more solid, makes this area feel like it's coming off the surface, like the waves are splashing up a little bit. Follow the river lines of the foam. There's going to be a few that are very distinctive that you're going to need to put in. That's one of them. And the reason why is that's going to give you the direction of the water and break up what's called being spotty. Spotty is something where it looks like there's so much everything going on everywhere that eye can't focus. It doesn't have a spot to sit on and rest. It's important for the eye to have a rest, and doing it this way will give you that. It gives you points of interest. Okay, now I'm warming this up a little bit as I get closer. I'm going to warm it with a little bit of that same color that we had in the the peachy white that we used in the clouds. I'm going to lighten that just a little bit. See how that feels like foam sticking above that sand? And we haven't even done the sand yet. And it already feels like a separate surface. This kind of swings up a little bit, just ever so slightly, and then comes down. And then there's this whole tiny little wave right here. This whole area is very light. And it's important to have that because it's once again a resting place. And it gives you an idea of the distance that the person viewing the painting is, if they were there in real life, how close they were to the surf. If you notice, there's still some grisaille under there. And notice what a wonderful addition that it adds to it. Okay, so now we're going to go on to that sand. So what color is that sand? Well, it's kind of warm, right? Let's try taking a yellow ochre that you add a little tiny bit of peach to it, and then a little tiny bit of green, just a speck of the green, not green, of lavender, just to tone it down just a bit. And the stroke direction is kind of the same direction as the water, just a little tiny more of an angle. I think I just matched exactly what I had underneath there, but let's just wet that up a little bit. And we want some darker I'm going to throw a little bit of neutralized lavender in there. I did a painting once that was shells on a beach, crushed shells on a beach. You know what I mean. Get a lot of them around in this area where the shells are, you know, I don't know if it's from seagulls or just waves or people walking or whatever, but there's more shells than sand. And to do that painting, it was very difficult, but to do that painting required about 10 different colors to get the right effect of it. Okay. Now, the clouds again, I feel like I want to go back into them again. I'm going to try something here. And it's not in the photograph, but it just feels like I still need to separate the clouds. Let me try first a light pink. And just break up some of that. You might have to go back in with some more darks too. Just a little. And I'm using a little more of a pure lavender that's not neutralized, because I got the neutralized underneath, so it kind of makes it neutralized a little bit already. And then the last thing I want to do, I want to take some very light Naples yellow and some white and just see if this is too much. Let's see. Maybe more white. Just here and there. Normally I would go in and I would like break up some of those clouds areas, but I'm so afraid that if I do that it's going to look too much like this, and I do want to keep that separate. So I guess this is where we will stop and call this finished. Now, if you notice, painting is painting. It's not about what you're painting, it's about learning how to paint. And learning how to paint is about understanding the science of light, the science of color, and the math of drawing. So to teach you how to paint isn't to teach you how to paint a landscape or a seascape or a portrait. It's teaching you how to paint. And that's what makes these lessons different than a lot of other lessons, is they teach you a lot through technique, and what I'm teaching you through is theory. And on that note, my book came out. It's on Amazon now. It's Painting Lessons. It's called Painting Lessons, and if you just put in Painting Lessons Deborah Heiberger, you'll probably get it on Amazon. But it's Painting Lessons, the Practical Theories of Painting and Drawing, something like that. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact title. But anyways, I'm going to do a Facebook launch of it, and probably an Instagram launch of it as well on Friday night, so that you'll see it Saturday morning. I should have a copy here. It's downstairs. I apologize. It's a nice, good-sized book. It's about this big, and it has inside of it a lot of lessons that I do. It's got the apple and the pear. It talks about the 6 lights. It talks about perspective. It talks about measuring. It talks about color theory. There's a whole section on color theory. And it has examples of stages of a painting, so if you wanted to try it, you could. But more than anything, it talks about all the foundations and the theories that I have been talking to you through these video lessons. So if you are local, I do have 100 copies myself that I can do signed copies. And if you're not local, you can just get it on Amazon. It's also has a Kindle version and I believe an Apple version as well. I wrote it with Nancy Satin, and she did a lot of the work, I'll tell you. She basically interviewed me and then put it all together for me, and formatted and everything. I mean, I owe a lot to this woman. So check it out. Deborah Heiberger, Nancy Satin, Lessons in Painting. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.